One of Jehovah's Witnesses attending the pure worship assemblies of Jehovah's Witnesses in Europe was stirred to write this report. He said, "The scarcity of food in England is well known to all, and with Britain's big festival, food and housing conditions are even worse. The thought of Jehovah's Witnesses having a big international convention in London seemed impossible to all but Jehovah's Witnesses. We know that when it is Jehovah's will to have a gathering of his people, nothing is impossible." So as previously announced, the Clean Worship Assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses opened on August 1st, full of joy, love, and enthusiasm, just as expected, and looked forward to by many thousands. As in all of our assemblies, the stadium was beautifully and colorfully decorated. Wembley Stadium, the largest in England, was hired to fit the crowds, and by the time the witnesses got through arranging flowers and shrubs around the field, it no longer looked like a place where motorcycle and dog races are held. This assembly was just as international as the Yankee Stadium assembly in New York. Our brothers were there in their native costumes, representing countries from north, south, east, and west. Foreign assemblies were held for the brothers who couldn't understand the English language. And while waiting in long cafeteria lines, known to all JWs, one could hear all these languages spoken. You can understand this when you realize that 40 different nations were represented at this assembly. It is interesting to note that at the missionary meeting called by Brother Knorr on Saturday night, it was found that 170 Gilead graduates were at the London Assembly representing 35 different countries where they had been sent on foreign assignments. Brother Knorr was not only pleased but amazed as to how these pioneers could get to London from far-off places like Siam, the Philippines, Assyria, Ceylon, and so forth. He wondered if they had hitchhiked across the Atlantic and Pacific. All in all, there were 2,200 pioneers at London, and 800 were from overseas. One of the most interesting of the foreigners among the Lord's people was a king from one of the tribes of Africa, fully dressed in native costume, but wearing the same kingdom smile as seen on all the other faces. One of the interesting things noted by us all was the music arrangement. The orchestra, one of the most complete up to date, was encased in a closed-in section, all in glass, and they had their own leader. Just under this, in the grandstands, was the chorus with their leader, and out on the field, visible to all, was the very interesting and talented brother who led the assembly in kingdom songs. All music conductors were tied in to each other by earphones, so the three conductors were in harmony in music and in spirit. One of the highlights in the way of new truths was Brother Fran's talk, "Princes Shall Rule in Justice," where he informed many anxious thousands of listeners that the princes are here and have been sitting in their places since 1919. We can all look forward to the watchtowers where we can get more information on this point. There were 3 new releases given to us. The first was something we hadn't seen for many years, new tracts. These 4 little tracts will be used from door to door and will undoubtedly be very effective. The first, "What do Jehovah's Witnesses believe?" The second, "Bible Truths." The third, "Jehovah's Witnesses, Communist or Christian?" The fourth, "Awake from Sleep." The new book, "What Has Religion Done for Mankind?" should serve to wake up thousands who have been putting their trust in religion and finding that it has done nothing to better conditions. This beautiful yellow book was received with excited applause and much joy and thanksgiving to Jehovah for another wonderful gift. After Brother Knorr finished the public lecture, "Will Religion Meet the World Crisis?" that he delivered to 36,315 persons, he released a booklet by the same name, containing his 1 hour and 15-minute talk, and told each of us to take that booklet home with us and study it very carefully, as it contained much that we needed. All of us noticed that there was sort of a theme that was emphasized at all the assemblies. That is, to renew our minds by knowing Jehovah's thoughts and to study and restudy our Bibles, to learn what it contains and know it, to always get Jehovah's mind on matters. Also, at each assembly, much attention was given to the training of children so that they too can know and have the mind of Jehovah, so they will be prepared for the future life. Many children gave experiences of their own work, and the little summer pioneers told about what a great share they were having in the theocracy's increase. Two young publishers from Denmark, brother and sister in the flesh, one 18 and the other 15, rode their bicycles from Denmark through Germany, Belgium, and Holland to Ostend, Belgium. To cross over the channel to England with their cycles cost too much money, so they left them there and took the boat. They hitchhiked up to London from Dover, and the only word they could speak in English was Wembley. They got to the stadium and were greeted and cared for. What faith these two young people had. At the close of the assembly, when the convention report was given, we realized how much work the English brothers had done for us, and what a sacrifice they had made. They had, each and every one of them, saved up their ration points that they needed themselves and gave them to the cafeteria. When we saw how little there was in England, we could appreciate this act of love and generosity. We also learned that there had been over 3,000 volunteer workers. One thing we all noted was the politeness and orderliness of the English people. Never did we see pushing or shoving. Everyone lined up in queues or lines to get their books, their dinners, their tickets, and so forth. All in all, we were greatly enriched and blessed, and as Brother Knorr so fitly put it, we would go to our homes and tell the other publishers just what they had missed. This we are trying to do in this little write-up. We know that the 1,123 who were baptized on Friday morning will always remember this assembly. From London, we crossed back over the Channel to get to Paris for another great feast. However, this feast was prepared for us in French. Many talks were translated from English to French, so for those of us who spoke the two languages, we were doubly blessed. This was really something for both the French brothers as well as the Americans and other visiting brothers. Imagine the impression made on the Americans as they saw their French brothers walking in with their lunch under their arms, consisting of a loaf of French bread about a yard long and a couple of bottles of red French wine. The food served at the cafeteria was superior to the food in England, as there is more to be had in France and no rationing. This was the first cafeteria to be had by an assembly in France. In fact, this was the greatest thing held in France as far as our brothers are concerned. France has been very far behind up until now. Their releases have been few, and it came as a wonderful surprise to have the equipped book released to them in French. When it is considered that they have had few books translated into French, you can appreciate how much this book is needed in French-speaking countries. They have no yearbook, only texts printed in the back of the watchtower. The Awake has only come out once a month, but we were thrilled to find out that next year we will have the Awake distributed twice a month. Many other books have never been translated, so that these French, who are now beginning to wake up spiritually, will have these wonderful new truths to feed upon. For the Americans, there was not too much change while they were in London, but when they got to France, it was another new thing for them. This was the first time they had been in a place where they couldn't talk to people, where they couldn't ask their directions, where they couldn't order their food in a restaurant because they couldn't read the menu or talk to the waiter. Many of them seemed a bit troubled and grieved over the awkward situation they were in, but they could appreciate what refugees and Gilead graduates have had to go through when they had to go into a foreign country to preach the gospel when they could not speak the language. Brother Knorr gave the same talk in Paris as in London for the public. 10,000
10,456 attended and received the booklet, Can You Live Forever in Happiness on Earth?, in French and Polish, as there are many, many of our brothers from Poland who have refugeed in France. 741 pioneers were in Paris, and 351 goodwill were baptized. One of the most interesting things to be noted was the favorable newspaper write-ups here in a Catholic country. The polite comment on the orderliness of Jehovah's Witnesses. They said that we had turned the sports palace into a cathedral. For the first time in the history of the palace, there was no smoking to be seen. The police said that we were the only ones who practiced what we preached. The work is definitely on the increase in France, finally, after so long a time. And for those who attended this assembly, we're sure that this assembly will be a great aid in helping France to get organized for their increase. As Brother Knorr announced, the Frankfurt assembly would be the biggest and the best. And this statement was no mere exaggeration. It was true. The assembly really had its beginning when Brother Knorr landed at the big airport just outside Frankfurt. The local radio station had made arrangements for a personal interview with him even before he could get off the airfield. This was a sounding off of the convention. The interview was widely broadcast, and there were good write-ups and photos in the daily papers from that time on. When this assembly hit the front page, it stayed there. Many broadcasting stations carried the newscasts of the assembly, which were heard in many of the surrounding countries. The thought in most of the conventioners' minds when they neared Frankfurt was, how am I going to find the stadium? Not only Jehovah's Witnesses, but everybody else found out long before they reached the city limits that Jehovah's Witnesses were holding their clean worship assembly there, just where it would be held and when. Big signs, Jehovah's Zugen, were posted along the autobahns going into the city near the airport, and on large street signs at intersections. Signs directing visiting conventioners directly to the stadium made getting lost impossible. Maybe we couldn't read the signs in German, but we saw the words Jehovah's Zugen and could guess that it meant Jehovah's Witnesses and could follow the arrows. As we approached the convention grounds, we saw the vast tents and wondered what they could be used for, as they covered acres of ground. These were the mass quarters, or sleeping tents. 26,000 conventioners slept in these tents on 316 tons of hay. In the surrounding woods, there were long troughs that served for washing and bathing. And behind these were the large toilets built for these sleeping in the mass quarters. Other immense tents served as cafeteria, book rooms, pioneer registration, hospitals, and so forth. The most interesting tent was one marked Ostzone, which to us is East Zone, as you've probably guessed. This tent was to take care of those from the East Zone of Germany who could sneak across the border without being caught to come to the assembly. These brothers were fed, clothed, and lodged. Our hearts were surely with these faithful ones. Each one of them had a story to tell of courage, faith, and affliction. All around this East Zone tent were notes from one brother to another trying to locate each other, since they had been separated by the war or released from concentration camps and so forth. Or messages that one had carried out of the East Zone to some dear one in the West Zone. To see these brothers was a very touching scene. Some of them were very poorly clad, some without shoes. The food was cooked in 44 steam cookers that were boiled up in a real unique way. They were told they couldn't get coal. They tried gas, but that cost too much. So they went to the railroad, got a locomotive, and boiled up the 44 steam cookers with a train engine. What a sight to see. The Germans, in their usual wonderfully organized manner, had everything down to a system, and we have never seen such hard workers, nor such willing ones. There were 428 publishers and 24 pioneers doing convention work. 14 13,000 territories were prepared for house-to-house work, 3,800 for street work, and 3,095 for placard and handbill work. 24,000 names of interested persons were handed in during pre-convention work. There were 1,400 companies and groups from Germany represented at Frankfurt, and each group sat together under a sign that was held by one of them identifying their group. These signs played an important role during the whole assembly. Each company was assigned their territory for service even before they got to Frankfurt. The only day set aside for service was Saturday. During this one morning, 3 cities were completely and systematically worked: Mainz, Wiesbaden, and Frankfurt, and surrounding territory. One of the circuit assemblies was held in Berlin, and the circuit servant gave a report of the activity there. In Berlin proper, there are 3,800 publishers now, whereas in 1935 there were 380. 7,365 attended the last circuit assembly held there. There are 1,000 publishers in the east zone of Berlin, working in the underground fashion. There are 16,532 publishers in the east zone of Germany that are known of, but there is no way of knowing how many there really are. 480 from the east zone got over to Frankfurt, and many came knowing that they could never return to their homes. Many experiences were given from the platform of these brothers, and some of the friends who spoke both German and English were kind enough to translate them for us. Time keeps us from telling you about them now. The most noted thing of this assembly was the zeal, love, unity, and enthusiasm of these German brothers. This feeling among them cannot be described on paper. Just to say that they are zealous does not say all there is to it. They have faith, and their faith has been tried and found true. What a joy to them to see 47,432 assembled with them for the public lecture. The Americans had quite an experience. They were a novelty to the Germans. When one walked onto the stadium grounds, they were often surrounded by the German brothers, and if they got started signing books and programs for the Germans, it would turn out to be an all-day job. The colored brothers from the States were also almost mobbed day and night, as they were a real novelty to the Germans. They had seen few colored people in their lives, and none in the truth. One German pioneer from Alabama signed programs until his arm gave out. He was never seen without at least 100 around him taking pictures and so forth. The Germans are known to be great musicians, and their orchestra was actually thrilling. Most of them were professional musicians. Of the 160 in the orchestra, 90 played the violin, 15 accordions, and the brass section blasted out fanfares throughout the kingdom songs. And they were played like they had never been played before. After Brother Knorr finished his final talk, and Brother Frost gave his final words, we sang a closing song, and Brother Frost, branch servant of Germany, closed with prayer. After the prayer, you could hear a pin drop. No milling around as we are used to in America. Brother Knorr was still out on the field along with Brother Frost. The friends on the stand began to wave goodbye to him. He looked around him on all sides at the many thousands waving to him, and then he began to wave back. The band started up playing "God Be With You Till We Meet Again." Then the friends, out of love and emotion, pulled out their handkerchiefs and began waving them to Brother Knorr. Let us say right here that it was not out of creature worship that this act was done, but out of love and out of restrained emotion that they have had for so many years of restriction. It was completely spontaneous. And for those of us who were Americans and who had never seen such a display of emotion and such a scene, could not use our handkerchiefs for waving to Brother Knorr, as they were busy using them for other purposes. As we look looked around us, we couldn't see a dry eye, brothers and sisters alike. Finally, they broke through the guards, and about 4,000 or 5,000 of the brothers ran out on the field and surrounded Brother Knorr. From where we stood, we could see Brother Knorr and Brother Frost, and their smiles and joy was as great as those around them. I wish I could describe this scene, but words fail me. Those who have been in the truth for many, many years have stated that they never saw anything like this. To leave the assembly, there were 30 special trains that had to be chartered. The witnesses asked to have the trains brought out to the siding outside of the stadium. But the railroad officials said it was impossible to do it. However, they didn't know the organization of our brothers. Each group stood under these well-known signs, and as the loudspeakers called out the name of the group, this group would calmly walk aboard the train, and it would take off. This procedure was followed until all were loaded, and the impossible was done again.
You pulled mine. That is report number 1. We have another report as seen through the eyes of a different brother. There may be a few duplications, but this second report is so good, we believe you'll enjoy it too. I arrived in Frankfurt on Wednesday, August 22nd, and the assembly was not due to begin until Friday the 24th. This was a chapter in his life he would never forget. The first thing we saw on arrival was big placards reading, "Welcome Jehovah's Witnesses from America, Canada," and so forth. Large sections had been set aside at the stadium for sleeping accommodations, all neatly divided off in sections A, B, C for the brothers and separate sections for the sisters. In these sections were straw-filled mattresses, and that was the accommodation that thousands occupied throughout the convention. The cafeteria arrangement was excellent, and good food was served throughout the convention. Plates were provided, but you had to bring your own cutlery. If you forgot to bring it, you had to do the next thing best. I started to look around for someone who could understand English, and the first brother to meet me was one who, during World War II, had been a prisoner of war in Texas, where he learned some English. I told him I wanted to get acquainted with the German brothers and talk with them, so I could tell our brothers back in Canada something of their conditions firsthand. He looked around and saw one who is a district servant in the Eastern Zone, and he hailed him and took me over to meet him. I had a long talk with him, even though he did not speak much English. He told me there had been 132 immersed at their last circuit assembly. The week previous, 100 immersed. And the week previous to that, 88. These meetings on immersion services are held in rooms secretly with blinds and curtains pulled down. No meetings are held publicly in the Eastern Zone. He said there were 16,000 publishers in that zone and 250 pioneers. And even at that very moment, more than 800 faithful kingdom publishers were in the concentration camps. Following the war years, conditions were very, very bad, and the brothers were so weak, it was common for many of them to faint at meetings. As Brother Allen was talking to his district servant, whom he called by his first name, Ernest, a sister came up in great excitement. She too was from the Eastern Zone. Brother Ernest later interpreted what she had told him, that she was 2 nights getting across the Iron Curtain and had slept out in the open those nights. I asked how they got their Watchtower magazines, and Ernest said it was all done through couriers, everything going to a central point in East Berlin, and couriers delivered them from there, placing them on their bodies next to their skin at the risk of life imprisonment if they are caught. At a circuit assembly at Magdeburg, Eastern Zone, over 700 were there, all under secret arrangements, under the very noses of the communist secret police. They're very efficiently organized. Only when they wanted to have a meeting of the servants, they hired a room in a theater. To get into the meeting without being noticed, they bought tickets for the show and walked in, and no one ever knew
there was a theocratic meeting going on in that theater. Another sister came rushing up to Ernest and greeted him in German, showing him a letter. He later explained to Brother Allen that this sister had got across from Magdeburg, and the letter was from a brother who had been working at the branch office and was in prison, sentenced to life. He is 62 years of age. The letter read in part, "My dear sister, I am getting along as well as can be expected. I understand you will soon be going on a holiday. When you get back, be sure to pay me a visit." Another brother came up talking in German to Ernest, told him that the week previous, 9 were in a private room holding a watchtower study with doors bolted, and the secret police broke in and arrested the 9 and took all the Bibles and literature and put them in jail. How did this brother get across the Iron Curtain? One of their number knew the time of the changing of the guard at the borderline at midnight, and in the few minutes in between, they waded through the river. Those who get across never have any difficulty on the west side, the U.S. zone. Next came a young sister. She had been 2 nights getting across, working cautiously little by little until she made it. She had just arrived at the assembly, tired and mussed, but oh so happy. Did she hunt up a beauty parlor to pretty up? Oh no. She was looking for the volunteer service department, and there she grabbed hold of a wheelbarrow and went to work. This was still Wednesday, and the assembly did not begin until Friday. There was much work to be done. Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany are not interested in material things. They're interested in but one thing, and that is to advance the pure worship of Jehovah in their midst. There I saw her pushing this wheelbarrow with a song of praise on her lips and a light in her eyes that no beauty parlor could give her. A witness before men and angels. One brother told me of witnessing one day to a woman. She told him her daughter had been tricked into carrying a package from the western to the eastern zone. She was caught and put in a concentration camp for 5 years. She had been used as an innocent victim, and she was so discouraged she talked of committing suicide. However, this woman went on to say that she had just recently been able to visit her daughter and found her in much better spirits. She said, "Mother, I have found the most wonderful thing, the way to life." Her cellmate was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. She told her mother to be sure and contact Jehovah's Witnesses, study their publications, and you too will find the way to life. Before this, she wanted to commit suicide at being put in a concentration camp. And now she said, "I don't want to die now. I want to live in the new world." Her daughter told her, "You must hurry to get this knowledge, for it is later than you think." Brother Allen visited the branch at Wiesbaden. It is a large, huge building which formerly was a military garrison. There are 1,400 companies in the western zone and 22 units in West Berlin. There are 105 in the Bethel, or branch, at Wiesbaden. On Friday, the morning the assembly opened, Brother Allen left his hotel and walked to the stadium. As he neared the stadium, he wondered why he saw no one around the huge building. All was quiet outside, and he had expected to see thousands around. He looked at his watch. It was just 9:15 a.m., and the assembly was to open at 9 a.m. On entering, what a sight met his eyes. 32,200 people seated in their places and listening with rapt attention to the opening remarks of the chairman. He was 15 minutes late. All the other 32,200 were there on time, and there were none outside. He felt embarrassed as he went in and took a seat. Brother Franz was speaking in German. There were no children moving about. There was an orchestra of 150 pieces, most of them professional musicians. The music could not be described. It was glorious. There was life in it. On Saturday, there were 38,226 present, and 2,373 were immersed. 24 different nations were represented at that assembly. There were only 6 brothers from Canada. The zeal, the enthusiasm that predominated that assembly was marvelous. It did something to you. You know the brothers there appreciated assembling one with another. Brother Schroeder spoke in Dutch. He said, "I am completely astounded by the audience, how quietly they sit, and the attention paid to all that is said." Brother Knorr gave a marvelous talk. You could feel the audience contact. There was warmth. There was love in it, a fighting determination on the part of all to prove steadfast to the end. He released the equip book in German, and the applause, well, the mighty Niagara Falls would sound like a whisper compared to the roar of applause by those brothers. You had a lump in your throat. Mention was made of a sister at the age of 80 who was told she had only 1 week to live. She got up out of her deathbed and went out preaching and then died. That is the kind of zeal, the determination they have over there. You could sense it everywhere around you. Then came Saturday morning, a beautiful day, and the forests surrounding the assembly place looked as though they had opened their arms to welcome us. You may not understand the Dutch language, but you do understand the pure language. The music before the opening of the public talk was really outstanding. I will never forget it. They sang with praise and gratitude to Jehovah. That was the spirit of the whole assembly. There were 47,700 at the public talk. The mayor of Frankfurt was in attendance. Brother Reamer gave a talk. He said, "I had always wanted to come to Germany to meet the German brothers, and now I have had that wish granted." Because of the immense response of the audience to his words, Brother Reamer broke down and could not finish his talk. He was so deeply moved. Brother Eric Frost, branch servant for the Western Zone at Wiesbaden, gave a marvelous talk. There was applause after applause all through his talk. He told how 480 had got across the Iron Curtain and were present. One brother and his sister, age 75, had walked 11 days and 11 nights to get to Frankfurt Assembly. They had no money and little food, yet they walked all that distance to be present. In the city of Frankfurt, they have 2,300 Bible studies going. Jehovah's Witnesses are not there to take in any nightclubs. They're there to preach. Brother Knorr's final talk, to me, what took place there was a highlight in my life in the truth. I have never seen a more spectacular scene anywhere. He started by saying, "It has been good to have been in your midst. 10,000 of you brothers came through Hitler's devilish camps, and only 6,000 were physically able to preach. We have you brothers in Germany in our prayers in all parts of the earth. We love you and pray for you, but we need your prayers too, for us, for we have our difficult times. When you brothers were free after the close of the war, you didn't go to work to build yourselves beautiful homes and buy cars. No, you preached, and that is why you are today 55,000 strong, because you preached." He read 2 telegrams, one from the BOAC plane on its way back to Canada. 70 New World travelers at an altitude of 8,000 feet in the air send their warm love to Frankfurt Assembly. The second telegram was from Montreal, Canada, where 500 had just gathered to hear a report of the London Assembly from returning publishers, and they sent greetings and love to Frankfurt. Another thunderous applause. Brother Knorr then announced that he was going to have an additional building at Wiesbaden and going to install a new rotary press so they could print the Awake in the German language. Well, they clapped and clapped as though it meant life to them. The applause must have lasted fully 10 minutes. Brother Knorr said, "You have prospered theocratically in this land, 55,000 publishers, and now some of them would be taken to Gilead for training and sent to the ends of the earth." Brother Allen said he could now understand how David felt when he said, "My cup runneth over." It was flowing over with warmth and with love. The assembly closed with song number 91, "Zion, Most Happy Place," and then a prayer in German. The orchestra started playing "God Be With You Till We Meet Again," and then everyone pulled out their handkerchiefs to dry their eyes and wave them in a gesture of love to one another. Thousands and thousands jumped over the rails to get to Brother Knorr and bid him goodbye. I had never witnessed anything like it before. I just couldn't take it. I broke down like most of them around us. Those brothers knew, and all of us knew, that many of those were going back to their assignments with the threat of life imprisonment and torture before them. There were 50 special that figure is 30 special trains, and everything was so officially arranged there was no confusion. Loudspeakers announced where each group was to assemble. Those from one part of Germany met at a specified section. Each went to his assigned place, and from there they marched to their trains. It was pitch dark outside, and a very narrow path to the trains, but it all worked like clockwork. I wanted to go with them. Each group, as they were lined up, started singing. One group singing here, another over there, and when they got to their trains, more handkerchief wavings. When I finally got back to my hotel, it was on a wet pillow I went to sleep as I thought over that spectacle. In the morning, when I woke and thought over all that I had seen and heard, I turned my pillow over, for it was still damp, and it was not long before that side too was wet. In talking to Brother Ernest, he remarked that West Berlin would be a perfect setting for an international assembly with 125,000 present. I said, "Brother, if there's another assembly in Germany, I'll be there if I have to swim the Atlantic." That concludes that brother's report.
Picked up everyone one by one and brought them home right through the mob, through all the trouble. Missionaries had to lay down on the floor in the back of the car while he drove through. They didn't bother him. But if they had sat up in the back seat and showed their white faces, his car would have been turned over, the white people drug out, and they would have been killed. So for one whole week after that, our missionaries had to stay in their own missionary home and wait until all of this racial disturbance died down. But as soon as they could get out, they went out again and traveled around the streets, and they haven't been disturbed. And a lot of interest has been aroused, and people are listening to the truth. Well, it was because of that that they couldn't get out on the streets with handbills or placards, because the police forbid any gathering together of 3 or 4 people. They were afraid that if we distributed handbills and had placards on our bodies, that maybe 4 or 5 people might come up and start talking to you, and then a crowd would gather, and then they never knew what would happen. So any assembly was forbidden except indoors. Well, the city had allowed us to have their city hall, and they arranged for a public meeting, and we had a very good public meeting there with 307 in attendance. They thought that was very good because right after these riots, It was quite a disturbance in the city, and now people from these different nationalities, Chinese, Indians, Malays, they had all come together, and they asked many questions after the meeting was over. A number of names were also obtained, and I'm sure now studies have been started with these folks. Here again, our visit was too short, but we had to hurry on to Bangkok, where we have a branch office. That city is in Siam. That's the way we usually know it, but the real name of the country is Thailand. We have a fine organization there now, and a number of missionaries that we've sent there from Gilead. And here's another thing that made my heart very glad, and that is that these missionaries have learned to speak the Siamese language, and a number of them have accomplished that. Well, not perfectly, of course, but have accomplished it in 14 months' time. The second evening I was there was a service meeting, and two of the brothers from Chiang Mai, that's up in the northern part of Siam, they came down and took part in the service meeting, and they spoke their parts for 10 or 15 minutes in the Siamese language. Well, that amazed me. A Siamese isn't written with Roman characters like we write. They have the Sanskrit characters, and they don't break their words like we break them. They just keep on writing steady, right straight across the line, one stroke after the other. So you have to know the language so well that you know where to break these different words. Then just to illustrate how difficult this language is, it's all based on just the slight twist of the tongue and the sound that comes out of your mouth. You might say ma, and that means horse. You might say ma, and that means to carry. And then there are a lot of other ma's, and my, and me, and mo, and everything else that, well, if you don't listen closely, it practically all sounds the same to me. But here these brothers have got in with the people, got their books and studied and read and practiced the language and gotten themselves some teachers, and it was really interesting to see how they want to help those Siamese publishers. But when we were going into the city of Bangkok, which is about 13 miles from the airport, the company servant just couldn't wait. That's Brother Babinski. I guess a number of you folks here know him. He's graduated from school, used to be a circuit servant out in this way. Well, he just couldn't hold back anymore. He says, well, Brother Knorr, I got to let this go. We've made our 34% increase down here this past month. We've got 119 publishers. Well, they were very, very delighted with the good progress that had been made in that country. We arranged for a public meeting in the school, in the University of Siam. And they introduced the new methods of advertising public meetings, the first time with placards, and they got out on the streets. Well, the couple of the Siamese newspapers that don't like Jehovah's Witnesses down there because they're making so much progress started to call them communists, and they sent their photographer out and got their pictures, and then they put it on the front page of their paper. A very nice young Siamese girl, a pioneer, been working in the pioneer work for about 4 years. There they had her picture in these placards, and underneath, a communist trying to change the country. Well, it disturbed us terribly, so the brothers went down to the newspaper editor and talked to them about it and tried to explain to them we have nothing whatsoever to do with communism. We're the furthest away from it of any people. Well, they didn't like it because we talked to them and tried to set them straight, so they came out the next day with more propaganda against us. Well, we just didn't bother, let them talk. We'll talk to the people individually and straighten that out in their minds. And we went ahead with our advertising and getting ready for the public meeting. Well, when the time came to assemble at the auditorium, all the doors were locked. Well, we thought maybe the janitor was a little late in getting there. We had arrived an hour and a half early to get things straightened out. But it still kept itself locked up, and we couldn't get in, and we couldn't find the janitor or anybody else. So I just about came to the conclusion the best thing to do is hold a public meeting out in front of the school, in the big schoolyard under the bow tree. Well, the bow tree there is a very sacred tree. That's the one that, not that particular tree, but one like it, that Buddha sat under when he got all of his ideas for his religion and wrote out his books in regards to the Buddhist belief. So it wasn't so sacred that we couldn't get under it and do our talking there. So we were just about ready to fix that up when they found the janitor, and janitor says, well, I have no instructions to open up for you. No one's told me you're going to hold a meeting here, and I can't let you in. So then they insisted on this janitor or watchman calling up the principal of the school, the master, and well, he apologized profusely and said he had forgotten to tell the janitor, and he said, well, you better open up and let them in. Well, we had paid the greater portion of the fee for the use of the hall. So in the next 15 minutes, it was a hustle and bustle, fixing up the chairs and getting them in order and opening the windows and fixing up the platform. And in the meantime, why, people were flowing in, and they came in very good. In fact, we had 367 people at our public meeting there in Bangkok. I heard later, after I had gone and got a letter in Tokyo from Brother Babinski telling me the rest of the story. What had happened, the newspapers that were calling us communists called on the head of the school, and they put the pressure on him. And they told him that they better not open their doors for Jehovah's Witnesses to come in there. Well, of course, he didn't think we were communists, but here the newspapers came out and said we were, and they were putting the pressure on him, so he didn't know what to do, so he just let the thing ride and hoped nothing would happen. Well, it happened. We got in. But when they went to offer this man the remainder of the fee, the rest of the rent, he said, well, no, I made a mistake in not notifying our watchman, and he apologized very profusely and said, no, I won't take the rest. You paid enough. And I want to tell you now, from the explanations you've made and the fine meeting you had there and the orderly way it was conducted, and I understand now the things that were said, anytime you want to use this university and its auditoriums, you come right on back and we'll give it to you. So it was a good fight to the finish. They really had their problems there in Siam because there are so many Buddhists. In fact, the whole country believes the Buddhist religion. But it is interesting to see that it isn't the converted Buddhists into Christianity that are now coming into the truth, but people that are Buddhists, been raised Buddhists, believe the Buddhist religion for years, that our missionaries and company publishers are witnessing to. And on Sunday morning, there were 8 honest-to-goodness Buddhists that had consecrated their lives to serve Jehovah God. So we're very happy that we're making inroads into the Buddhist religion. But it is difficult because Buddha has taught in his religion that in 2,000 years from a certain date of his, that great prosperity and peace would come into the land, and that a sort of a new world would be in operation. Well, that's supposed to happen over there in Siam in 4 or 5 years. So when our brothers go from door to door and start talking to a Buddhist about the kingdom and all of its blessing and how that it's near at hand, and point out the times, the signs of the times and the conditions in which we live, they say, oh, that's right, we agree with you. Well, would you like to have this book and study more about it? No, we know all that you've said. Well, then they've got to start all over again and show them that our teachings are based on God's Word. They have really a double work to do over there. First of all, you've got to convince them that their religion is not the true religion, but it's false. You've got to get them to see that there is a great one in the universe whom we call Jehovah. We've got to get them to finally believe that he has given us a book called the Bible, and that it's an inspirational book, inspired by him, and it is his letter or his writings to us, then after you get them to believe that, then you've got to teach them what's in the book. So it takes time. It takes patience. It takes a lot of hard work. Now, if you think you've got a lot of trouble in your back halls and your Bible studies, well, just think of Siam and Japan and China, Fiji Islands, and a lot of other places in the Far East, and you'll think, well, our task is simple compared with theirs. And you still have a greater advantage because you can speak the language you were born with. They have to learn a new language, sometimes a couple of different tongues, and speak that and still convince them that this is God's word, the truth. So it certainly is a joy to be associated with these missionaries and to see their zeal and their push and their hard labor of love, all in the interest of the kingdom. I could tell you a lot about Siam, but we had to hurry along then and go on to Rangoon. That's the principal city in the country of Burma. Here's another country that is going through great trial and difficulty internally because of revolutions, insurrections, all kinds of hardship. They have a new government. They've separated themselves from the British Commonwealth of Nations, and they've set up their own government, and they believe that Buddha, of course, has sent special messengers to their heads of the government, and he is blessing them and directing their government. Then on the inside of the country, there are a number of so-called Christians, or Koreans, that are fighting the government, and they're supposed to be Christians, and they believe that the God of heaven has directed them to take over the control of the government. So you have Christianity so-called on one side and the Buddhists on the other, fighting internally and just killing and causing all kinds of trouble. Well, of course, that makes it difficult for Jehovah's Witnesses to get around in the land and preach the gospel. When we arrived in Rangoon, the convention was on, and there had been several sessions, and 80 persons were in assembly. Well, our brothers up in the north, where the real internal strife is going on, could not get down to Rangoon. The only way you can reach them is by air. If you go by train, it isn't safe to travel, because when you travel either north or south on the Burmese Railroad, they put soldiers on it, that's true. But when the insurrectionists come and attack the train, well, the soldiers run in the woods, and there the passengers are in the train, and they're the ones that get shot. So they don't get much protection. So it isn't safe to travel by train unless you feel like getting shot and losing your life pretty soon, or getting robbed of everything you have. So our brothers in the north stayed home, and they could do their preaching there and hope that someday one of our brothers, the missionaries, would come to them by plane and then talk to them during the day and the evenings that they spent in their homes. They arranged for a public meeting in the town hall, and that was held at 6:30 in the evening. The Burmese have the habit of, when their work is over, to go home, or if there are any functions in the city that they're going to attend, they're held right after working hours. So we had our public meeting at 6:30, so as soon as the offices and factories were closed, while those who wanted to come could attend. We had a good attendance, we thought, of 256, considering that there were only 80 persons attending the assembly. After the public talk, Brother Henschel spoke to them, and I left and went off to a radio station owned by the government, and I was given 15 minutes time to give a discourse during what they called their English hour. The brothers in Burma thought that this talk was going to do a tremendous amount of good and get into a lot of homes that they couldn't reach, and if they did reach them, this talk would have opened up the door to them. But when I started talking, why, Brother Henschel stopped in our auditorium and tuned in the radio so that those at the convention could listen to this public talk too. At our last meeting with our brothers, we had 90 in attendance, and then after the evening meeting, they had a little cafeteria, a little lunch, so we went upstairs above their Kingdom Hall and had this little repast. Well, then it seemed to me as when the convention and prepare themselves for kingdom work. Of course, the conditions and movements around Burma are all restricted. And when you come into the country, you check with the police and you check out with the police and the war authorities and the army. So when you say you're going, you have to go, and we had a lot of trouble getting our visas. We just got them 2 days before we entered. They're checking on everybody coming in and coming out for fear that they'll take sides with the revolutionaries inside of the country. But we had to leave early in the morning, and that was their day of celebration. Their water festival began for the youngsters. This time we were a little bit more fortunate than last time. We didn't get all of our clothes soaking wet because we were traveling in a sedan and you could wind up the windows. So when they came with their buckets of water to throw on you and wash your sins away, and the kids, they have a new novelty over there now. They have these squirt guns. They load it up, and they're big ones, and they just give that thing a pump, you know, and they can really aim it and soak you well. Well, we just see a kid getting all ready to fire at us, and we'd wind up the window, and we'd get the car washed that way and preserved our clothes. Quite different from the time we were there before when they had the water festival on and we were in the Jeep. Well, the Jeep didn't do much protection. The buckets of water just come in and land on your lap. You look sort of messy after the first shower you got and the remainder of the day. In fact, the water festival was going to be held Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and Monday. And it was amusing to sit in the hall and hear the closing announcements of the convention when the brother said, now, we will cancel our Saturday evening study and also our Watchtower study on Sunday, and we will not meet again until Tuesday because of the water festival. Well, I knew just what he meant when he said the water festival, because 4 years ago when we were there, the water festival was on in all of its power. And when we got to the Kingdom Hall, we were soaked, but we didn't know we should take clothes along to change. The other brothers and sisters brought clothes with them wrapped up in a cellophane cloth or a raincoat, so they got soaked, and then when they got to the hall, they changed their clothes. We weren't quite so fortunate. So now they cancel their meetings during the water festival and put it off until it's all over. They go at it in a big way. They build large booths along the highways and in the cities and decorate them. They put in barrels and barrels of water. They have one interesting thing I learned of. When the big buses come along filled with people, why, they're very kind to the passengers. They'll stop the bus, and then they'll take in some lime juice or orange juice or sweetened water and give it to all the passengers, and they drink this, and they're very grateful for it. After they gather up the glasses or cups and take it back into the little booth, well, then everybody's loaded with buckets of water, then they throw the water on them after that. So it isn't safe to ride in a bus or a car or to be on the streets or anything in Burma unless you're out in it for the fun of it. Of course, they wash your sins away and get you fixed up for the next year. Well, then we left Burma and had to fly back to Bangkok, and we expected that Brother Babinski, the branch servant, would meet us at the airport because we had a layover there of 12 hours. We were to get a plane out of there at 3 o'clock in the morning for Hong Kong. Well, when we got off the plane, we didn't see anything of Brother Babinski. He was missing. We thought, well, maybe he got a flat tire or was delayed or something held him up. So we went through immigrations and customs, and pretty soon Brother Babinski came in apologizing and say, I'm awfully sorry, but I was talking to a woman out here. Well, as long as he was talking the truth, it was all right. And that's what he was doing, and he was quite excited about this experience he had. He had met a princess of the royal family. She was in the restaurant there. Evidently, she had an appointment to look after the restaurant, and he was talking to her in Siamese. So he was explaining the kingdom and our work, and he forgot all about his time, and he never heard our plane come in. So when he looked at his watch, why, he thought, well, certainly we must be there. So he excused himself and came in, found us, and we got through. Well, he took us out and introduced us to her. She's one of the royal family, a cousin to the present king. So then we all talked to her for a while, and she went in town with us. It's a 13-mile drive in the car. So we had the opportunity of telling her more about the kingdom, and she was quite interested. And during our course of conversation, we found that